After 25 years in the Army, you'd think I'd be used to surprises. I've dealt with broken supply chains in the middle of a desert, last-minute deployment changes, commanders who couldn't make up their minds, and soldiers who thought duct tape could fix anything. But nothing in my military career prepared me for the sight waiting for me when I rolled my suitcase down the hallway of my building in Denver that afternoon. I had just finished 3 months of transition training at Fort Carson and was finally heading back to my penthouse at Riverfront Park. I'd been looking forward to that moment since week 2 of the training. The place wasn't just a home. It was the one thing I'd built entirely on my own. It was bought with deployment pay, retirement savings, bonuses, every overtime shift I could squeeze in during logistics rotations, and the kind of discipline only the military can beat into you. That penthouse was my quiet spot above the city, the first place where I didn't have to share a wall, follow orders, or sleep with one eye open. So imagine me, freshly cleaned up, uniform packed away, wearing jeans for the first time in months, stepping out of the elevator and walking confidently toward my door. I slipped the key into the lock like I'd done 1,000 times. Except this time the lock didn't budge. I tried again and again, nothing. The door didn't just reject the key. It felt like the whole thing had decided I was a stranger. Great, I thought. 3 months away, and the building decided to upgrade the locks without telling anyone. Classic property management. I was already preparing my annoyed speech for the front desk when the door suddenly swung open from the inside. And there he was. A man I had never seen in my life stood in my doorway wearing gym shorts, holding a laundry basket, and staring at me the way people stare at a raccoon that wandered into their kitchen. For a good 5 seconds, neither of us said a word. I looked at him. He looked at me. The laundry basket looked like it regretted being part of the situation. Finally, he asked, "Can I help you?" Those 4 words were enough to make my heartbeat spike in a way combat drills hadn't managed in years. I said, "Yes. You can start by telling me what you're doing in my apartment." He blinked a couple of times and his face scrunched up like I'd just told him gravity stopped working. "Your apartment?" he repeated. "This is my place." I stared at him, waiting for a punchline that did not come. "No," I said, calm but firm. "This penthouse belongs to me. I live here." He shifted his weight like he wasn't sure if I was joking, delusional, or trying to sell him something. "Ma'am, we moved in 2 weeks ago. We closed on the sale last month. The place belongs to me and my wife now." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process the sentence. "You closed on what?" He disappeared inside for a moment and came back with a folder. I recognized the layout instantly. Colorado real estate paperwork. He flipped it open and pointed to the seller's name. My name. My full legal name. The signature underneath looked like mine too. The loops, the slant, the pressure marks, whoever forged it knew exactly what they were doing. My training kicked in. My breathing slowed. I felt that cold, steady focus I always got before dealing with a crisis. "Who sold it to you?" I asked. He hesitated, looking concerned now instead of annoyed. "Your sister, Vanessa Hayes. She handled the sale with a power of attorney. She said you were out of state and she was managing the property for you." There it was. A punch to the chest would have been gentler. I didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say to him. None of this was his fault. The man bought a home. He did everything by the book. I thanked him for showing me the papers and stepped back into the hallway before he could ask more questions. Inside, I felt something that wasn't shock and wasn't rage either. It was the kind of controlled burn I'd felt on deployment when something went wrong and there was no time to fall apart. I'd learned early in the Army that panic is useless and fear is expensive. But anger, when you know how to use it, anger can build entire operations. I walked down the hallway slowly, rolling my suitcase behind me, thinking through every moment of the past 3 months. I had been away, yes. I had given Vanessa a temporary POA, yes. I trusted her because she'd helped with the paperwork when our mother passed. And I assumed, foolishly, that family meant something you didn't have to defend yourself against. I made it to the parking garage without remembering the elevator ride. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car with more control than I felt and sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked. There was only one place to go next. Vanessa lived in Colorado Springs, in a small house she and her husband Brandon managed to hold onto between his gambling binges. I hadn't been there in months. The last time I visited, she'd been unusually warm, almost clingy, telling me how proud she was that I was retiring and how excited she was to help me transition to normal life. I didn't think much of it then. Now, looking back, the friendliness sat wrong in my memory, like a smile plastered over rotting wood. The drive south took a little over an hour. I didn't turn on music. I didn't call anyone. I didn't rehearse anything I would say. I kept driving and letting the facts line up the way they tend to when you stop trying to soften them. Vanessa had sold my penthouse. She had forged my signature. She had handled a full real estate transaction behind my back. She had used a POA I trusted her with. Every mile made the picture clearer. By the time I pulled into her driveway, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even angry in the loud, explosive way people imagine. It was a cleaner feeling, sharper, like something inside me had finally snapped into alignment. I walked up to the door and knocked once. I heard footsteps. The door opened. Vanessa looked at me, surprised for half a second before wiping it off her face like she was erasing a smudge. "Wow," she said. "You're back early." "Well." And just like that, the rest of the afternoon clicked into place, one detail after another, without anything needing to be announced as an ending or a beginning. The sound of the door clicking shut behind Vanessa stayed in my ears longer than it should have, like the air in her hallway didn't know if it was supposed to move or freeze. I stepped past her and into the living room without waiting for an invitation. If she noticed, she didn't say anything. She just crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, acting like I'd dropped by to borrow sugar instead of confront the fact that she sold the most expensive thing I owned. Her house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it just felt smaller now that I knew what she'd done. There were stacks of unopened mail on the table, a half-burnt candle on the counter, and the faint smell of someone trying very hard to cover up the scent of panic. Brandon wasn't in sight, but I knew he was around somewhere. A man that deep in gambling trouble always seemed to hover close to home like a storm cloud too heavy to wander far. Vanessa wasn't saying anything, and her silence wasn't nervous. It was the kind of silence people use when they want to push you into speaking first, so they can pretend they're the calm one. The trick works on civilians, maybe, but I've handled interrogations with soldiers twice her size who thought they could stare me down. I let the silence sit between us until she finally broke. "So," she said, "what's the problem?" The words were so absurd I had to blink a couple times. "What's the problem?" I repeated, not raising my voice, because sometimes calm hits harder. "You really want me to answer that?" She huffed, trying to look annoyed instead of cornered. "If you came here to yell, just get it over with. Brandon's taking a nap." I didn't bother looking toward the hallway to see if that was true. "I didn't come to yell." She rolled her eyes. "Right, because you're always the reasonable one." The way she said reasonable felt like an accusation. It carried that old tone from when we were younger, the one she used whenever someone complimented me instead of her. I had forgotten how sharp it could sound. I stayed standing. She stayed leaning. No one moved. "You sold my penthouse," I said. Simple, factual, like reading a supply report. She shrugged. A shrug. "Yeah, and?" My jaw tightened on instinct. "And? Vanessa, that property wasn't yours." "It was under my authority," she shot back. "You gave me power of attorney." "For VA paperwork," I said. "For mail, for medical forms, you weren't authorized to sell anything." "It still counts," she said, lifting her chin. "I had the legal documentation. Everything was signed. Not by me. No." She paused just a flicker, but it was there. Then she smoothed it over. "You think I forged your signature?" "I don't think," I said. "I saw it." Her expression tightened, but she kept pushing. "If you hadn't been off doing your army stuff, this wouldn't even be an issue." There it was, the shift, the resentment finally peeking out from behind her casual tone. "My army stuff," I repeated. "That's what we're calling military service now?" She crossed her arms tighter, like she needed something to hold on to. "You know what I mean." "Actually, I don't." She looked away for a moment, jaw working, before she snapped back at me. "You left. Again, you're always leaving. Every time something comes up, you run back to the army like it's your safety blanket." The words didn't sting. Not because they weren't meant to, but because I'd heard versions of that before, mostly from people who had no idea what service actually requires. "I wasn't deployed," I said evenly. "It was transition training. 3 months. You knew that." "And what was I supposed to do while you were gone?" she demanded. "Sit here drowning while you're off getting praised for being the strong military hero? You know what it's like watching you succeed at everything while I'm stuck dealing with real problems?" I didn't rise to the bait. Selling my home wasn't a solution. "It was," she said immediately, too immediately. "Brandon had debts. Real debts. People were threatening him. You don't understand what that's like. I understood more than she thought. Threats aren't foreign to people who've spent years in war zones. But this wasn't about fear. This was about choices. And she'd made the kind that didn't have a way back. You had other options, I said. No, she snapped. I didn't. You could have called me. She barked a humorless laugh. Right. So you could judge me? Tell me how irresponsible I am? Act like I'm ruining my life? I've heard it all before. You haven't heard it from me. She didn't respond. Her chest rose and fell faster now, and her eyes darted toward the hallway for just a second, the kind of glance people make when they're hoping someone will jump in and back them up. Brandon didn't appear. I adjusted my posture, letting my voice fall into that steady cadence I'd used in briefings. You used my trust to commit fraud. You didn't just sell an apartment. You emptied accounts, opened a HELOC. You moved money into places it wasn't supposed to go. She flinched, tiny but real. You're exaggerating, she muttered. No, I said. I'm stating facts. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You don't get it. If I didn't pay those people, they would have hurt him. Brandon put himself in that position, I said. You don't destroy someone else's life to clean up his mistakes. That penthouse was just a place, she snapped. No, I said quietly. It was my home. It was sitting empty, she shot back. You're barely there. You use it like a hotel. Nah. The sentence hit with a different weight, not because it was true, but because it told me exactly what she'd been telling herself to justify what she did. That if I wasn't physically present, it didn't really belong to me. That if I wasn't there to watch it, she could claim it. Like a child stealing a toy because the owner wasn't holding it at that moment. She lifted her chin again, defensive to the point of trembling. I did what I had to do. No, I said again, you did what was easiest. No. For a moment she froze, like the words pinned her in place. Then her expression hardened, and the anger returned full force. You know what? She said. This conversation is going nowhere. You can leave. I don't want you in my house. I didn't move. Neither did she. The air felt heavy, like it was waiting for someone to give it permission to shift. Then, from down the hallway, a familiar voice drifted out Brandon's, groggy and irritated. Who's out there? Vanessa straightened, suddenly unsteady. I didn't look toward him. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already standing in front of me, wrapped in the expression my sister wore, the mix of guilt she wouldn't admit, resentment she couldn't hide, and fear she couldn't contain. And as I stood there, I felt something lock into place inside me with the same cold certainty I used to feel right before stepping into a battlefield I'd already mapped out in my mind. Brandon's footsteps dragged closer, the slow, uneven rhythm of someone who wakes up irritated at the world and makes it everyone else's problem. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she didn't tell him to stay in the bedroom. She didn't tell him anything at all. She just watched the hallway like she was waiting for a second disaster to walk through it. He stepped into the living room shirtless, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. When he saw me, he froze for a moment. Not out of guilt, Brandon wasn't the type to feel that, but out of annoyance that a surprise visitor had disrupted whatever level of peace he thought he deserved. Oh, he muttered, you're back. As if I had just returned from a weekend fishing trip and not walked into my own penthouse being inhabited by strangers. I didn't dignify the comment with a response. Vanessa cleared her throat and spoke before he could open his mouth again. We were just talking. Nat. Brandon stretched his arms overhead like this was some kind of normal family meeting. Well, if you're here about the house, we already explained everything. You explained nothing, I said. And you don't get to speak for me. He smirked the way people do when they've gotten away with something long enough to believe they're untouchable. Look, the sale's done. You weren't using the place anyway. Who's out there? Vanessa straightened, suddenly unsteady. I didn't look toward him. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already standing in front of me, wrapped in the expression my sister wore, the mix of guilt she wouldn't admit, resentment she couldn't hide, and fear she couldn't contain. And as I stood there, I felt something lock into place inside me with the same cold certainty I used to feel right before stepping into a battlefield I'd already mapped out in my mind. No. She didn't have the authority to sell real estate, I said, and both of you know that. Technicalities, he shrugged. It's all the same in the end. I looked at him the way I used to look at broken equipment, trying to figure out whether it could be salvaged or needed to go straight to disposal. He responded by scratching his stomach like the conversation bored him. But Vanessa shifted, just barely. Her fingers curled against her arm like she was holding something back. I took a slow breath, the kind that helps steady a rifle shot. How much did you sell it for? Vanessa blinked, and Brandon answered first. Enough. Enough is not a number. He frowned. 700 something. 720, Vanessa muttered, eyes dropping for the briefest moment. I felt the number hit the air between us. The penthouse was worth at least $950. 720 meant someone got a bargain. A suspicious bargain. One that should have set off alarms for anyone involved. I didn't ask why she sold it so low. She already knew I knew the answer. You needed the money fast, I said. That's why you didn't wait for fair market offers. Brandon stepped closer like he thought physical presence would make his argument stronger. We didn't have time. You don't understand how dangerous debt can get. And instead of calling me, I said, you sold something that wasn't yours. Number sit. You think you're better than us? He snapped. Because you wear a uniform and have everything handed to you. This time Vanessa didn't hide how uncomfortable she was. She shot him a look, small but sharp. Nothing in the military has ever been handed to anyone. I earned every rank, every paycheck, every bruise, every sleepless night, and every miserable sweat-soaked day in a desert that didn't care whether I lived or died. But I didn't waste time educating a man who believed consequences were optional. Instead, I said, "What did you do with the money?" Brandon looked at Vanessa before answering, and that tiny hesitation was louder than yelling. We settled the debt, he said. Most of it. Most of it. There it was. A whole confession tucked neatly inside 3 words. Where's the rest? I asked. Silence. And then Vanessa took the bait, because Vanessa always filled silence with the wrong thing. Some of it went to bills. And the rest? I repeated. She stared at the floor instead of me. We needed some for expenses. Expenses, I echoed. Meaning gambling. Brandon's posture straightened a little like he'd been insulted. I'm not gambling anymore. Right, I said. You stopped, just like the last 8 times you stopped. His face reddened, and for the first time, he looked genuinely angry, not because I accused him, but because I wasn't intimidated. You don't get to judge me, he snapped. I can judge you for stealing my home, I replied. He barked out a laugh. Stealing? You weren't even there. You abandoned it. You're barely ever around, so who cares? I looked at him for a moment, then turned to Vanessa. This is who you sold my life to? Vanessa didn't answer. She rubbed her arms like she was cold, even though the room wasn't even chilly. I stepped past both of them and moved to the kitchen counter, tapping my fingers lightly against the surface. The room was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. You forged my signature, I said. You opened a HELOC. You drained accounts. You moved money, all under my name. It wasn't like that, Vanessa whispered. It was exactly like that. She swallowed hard, cheeks flushing. You don't get it, she said. You left me to deal with everything while you were off training. You always leave. You're always somewhere else. And when things fall apart for me, you always act like it's my fault. Selling my home wasn't you falling apart, I said. It was you choosing the fastest route to clean up his mess. Brandon bristled again. I'm right here. And that's unfortunate, I said lightly, which made him take a step back. Vanessa pressed her palms to her temples, overwhelmed now by something she couldn't pin on me. You don't know what it's been like, she said. You don't know how hard it is when every day feels like a fire you can't put out. And instead of asking for help, I said, you burned my house down to warm your hands. Her eyes snapped up, sharp, wounded, furious, all at once. That penthouse was never really yours, she snapped back. You were never there. You used it like a hotel. I'm the one who handled your mail, your paperwork, everything you couldn't be bothered to do. There it was. Not an apology, not regret, not even denial. Just justification. The kind that's been rehearsed silently for months. The kind people cling to when they know the truth won't protect them. I let the words sit there, because reacting to them would have been a waste of oxygen. Vanessa's shoulders rose and fell with shallow breaths. Brandon shifted from foot to foot like a kid waiting for a scolding he thought he could outrun. And I could feel something in the room changing, not dramatically, not explosively, just shifting, like a tide turning without anyone noticing until the water was already gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a vibration I didn't immediately check. I kept my eyes on Vanessa instead. She looked everywhere but at me. And that was enough to tell me what I needed to know about where this was heading, whether she admitted it or not. The vibration in my pocket wouldn't stop, and I finally pulled out my phone just to shut it up. A notification banner slid across the top of the screen, an automated alert from my bank. Not the kind that pops up when you buy coffee or pay a utility bill. This one was bold red. Unusual activity detected. Please review immediately. I didn't react. I didn't gasp. I didn't jerk upright. I just let the information settle into place the way you acknowledge bad weather rolling in. Not surprising, not shocking, just confirmation that the storm had been there all along. Vanessa must have sensed something because she took a step forward. What was that? I locked the screen before she could see any details. Nothing you need to worry about. Brandon scoffed. You're being dramatic again. You always make every little thing into a crisis. No wonder you can't keep relationships. That was funny, coming from a man whose idea of stability was a scratch-off ticket. I kept my voice even. You're real confident for someone who just admitted to blowing through most of the money from an illegal sale. It wasn't illegal, he snapped automatically. You keep saying that like repetition makes it true, I said. He opened his mouth again, but Vanessa cut him off with a sharp hiss. Brandon, stop. He looked offended like she'd betrayed him by interrupting whatever nonsense he thought he was contributing. But her eyes were locked on me now. There was something different in her expression, something I hadn't seen on her face in years. Not guilt, not shame, not fear. Desperation. The kind people try to hide under layers of denial until they run out of excuses. You can't undo the sale, she said quietly. It's done. The papers are signed. The new owner already closed. I looked around the space again, the apartment she'd handed over as if it were a couch she didn't want anymore. Where are my belongings? In storage, she said quickly, as if that made it better. We didn't throw anything out. We're not monsters. Brandon added, most of it's in good condition. A couple things broke when we moved them, but that's not our fault. Your furniture's old. I smiled slightly. The kind of smile that isn't joy, isn't humor, but the thin edge of patience collapsing. My furniture is 13 months old. Vanessa's shoulders sagged. Okay, well, some of it got scratched. Note, I didn't reply. I just let the silence stretch. People confess more in silence than they ever do under pressure. And right on cue, Vanessa's composure cracked. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. We didn't think you'd be back so soon. Brandon hissed her name like she'd just read their crimes out loud in a police station. His eyes darted between us, suddenly alert. We agreed we weren't talking about that, he snapped. I tilted my head. Talking about what? Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut for a second. It was supposed to be temporary. Just long enough to get caught up. We planned to buy it back eventually. Or something like that. Something like that, I repeated. Very reassuring retirement plan. Brandon glared. We were going to fix it. You don't understand what real pressure feels like. Wrong thing to say. My voice stayed level, but the temperature in the room shifted. I've served 3 deployments overseas. I've been mortared awake, walked through villages that could have blown up under my boots, and carried soldiers half my size and twice my weight out of firefights. I know pressure. You know inconvenience. He opened his mouth, decided against it, closed it again. Vanessa rubbed her forehead like she was trying to massage an explanation into existence. You're acting like we murdered someone. You stole my home, I said. That's close enough. We didn't steal it, she insisted weakly. We just reassigned it. Brandon nodded, like this was a brilliant legal argument. I stared at them both. Did you rehearse that line together, or did it just sound smart in your head? Vanessa's face crumpled again. You're not listening. We didn't have options. The credit cards were maxed. The medical bills. Whose medical bills? I asked. She froze. And that was all the answer I needed. Brandon? I asked. She swallowed. He needed treatment. It was expensive. I turned to him. You said it was all gambling debt. He squared his shoulders, trying to reclaim some dignity. I didn't lie. Not really. Gambling caused stress. Stress caused health problems. So technically, no, I cut in. Don't finish that sentence unless you want to hear how stupid it sounds out loud. He clamped his mouth shut again. The bank alert buzzed once more, insistent. I checked the screen this time. $9,800 withdrawal attempt, flagged for authorization. My fingers tightened around the phone. Funny timing, I said. Vanessa's voice came out thin. What do you mean? I held up the screen so they could both see. Brandon's face drained of color. That's not us. Try again, I said. His gaze flicked to Vanessa just a millisecond. But long enough? Brandon, she whispered, horrified. He shoved his hands in the pockets of his cheap sweatpants. I thought we had time. I didn't know you'd get an alert that fast. Impressive, I said. Most thieves at least wait until after the confrontation to commit new crimes. He bristled. We're not thieves. If you ever believe that, I said, you're more delusional than I thought. Vanessa stepped between us like she could mediate something that had no middle ground. Please, just calm down. We can fix this. You already said that, I replied. And every time you say it, the damage multiplies. Now, I'll pay you back, she said desperately. Anything you want, just tell me what you want. I looked at her for a long, quiet moment. I want you to stop pretending this is fixable. She flinched like I'd struck her. You think I wanted to do this? She said, her voice cracking hard enough to echo. You think I'm proud of what happened? You think I sleep at night? I think you sleep better than you deserve, I said. Brandon's jaw clenched. You're just mad you can't control everything. That was the sentence that finally made me laugh, not loudly, not mockingly, just a small, sharp exhale of disbelief. You think control is my issue? I said. Control didn't put us here. Your choices did. Vanessa sank onto a bar stool, elbows on her knees, face in her hands. She looked small, exhausted, younger than she was, older than she should have been, all at once. But remorse wasn't the same thing as accountability. Tears don't undo forged signatures. Anxiety doesn't erase wire transfers. And desperation doesn't unsell a home. Brandon paced like a trapped animal, muttering about unfairness and responsibility and how he didn't deserve this, which only proved how wildly disconnected he was from reality. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the bank. It was an email from my attorney, one I hadn't even reached out to yet. The subject line read, "Urgent. Call me immediately. This involves your property." I looked at the screen, then at the two people who thought they could rearrange my life because theirs was collapsing. And for the first time since walking through the door, I felt a shift inside me, subtle but unmistakable. Not fear, not anger, clarity. Quiet, surgical clarity that settles in when you stop reacting and start deciding. Clarity has a way of sharpening everything around it, even the things you wished were blurry. I stepped back from the counter, slipped my phone into my pocket, and walked toward the front door. Not in anger, not in retreat, but with the kind of composure that meant I was done wasting oxygen in a room that had run out of truth. Vanessa lifted her head as if she expected me to yell again or demand answers. But I didn't say anything at all. I just opened the door and stepped into the daylight. The air outside felt cold and clean, too honest to belong to the same place where people convinced themselves that fraud was reassigning property. I walked to my car without looking back, got in, and closed the door with a soft click. The stillness hit instantly, the kind that lets every detail fall neatly into its place. I pulled up my attorney's message. Call me immediately. This concerns a large unauthorized transfer from your home equity account. Home equity account. There it was again, the HELOC I didn't open. I dialed Crow's number, and he picked up before the first ring finished. Charlotte, I'm glad you called. I've been looking at an alert from your bank. Are you aware of a wire transfer attempt from your HELOC for nearly $10,000? Yes, I said, it wasn't me. I gathered, he replied dryly. Are you still in Colorado Springs? Yes. Good. I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring every document you can find that might help. And if you have access to the POA you signed for your sister, bring that too. I will. He paused. Charlotte, I'm going to be direct. This isn't a misunderstanding. Someone is exploiting your identity. Someone, I said, has a name. He exhaled like he didn't want to assume it, but knew exactly where the trail was pointing. I'll start pulling subpoena forms. We need the bank, title company, and realtor involved. And we're going to need the full closing file from the buyer. I already saw the signature. And? It's mine, except it isn't. That's what I expected. He paused again. We'll unravel it. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like preparation. On the drive back to Denver, I replayed the entire conversation with Vanessa. Her excuses, her resentment, her claim that I left, as if serving my country was a vacation I took to inconvenience her. The bitterness in her voice hadn't been new. It had roots that stretched back years, maybe decades, buried under every moment she felt overshadowed, overlooked, or held to standards she never asked for. And now, stripped down to the truth, her actions made a kind of twisted emotional sense. She hadn't betrayed me because she was desperate. She'd betrayed me because it was easy, and because she believed, deep down, that I had something she deserved. The next morning, I walked into Crow's office, a narrow building near downtown filled with old wooden furniture and enough law books to crush someone if they fell off a shelf. He looked up the moment I stepped in. "You look like someone who didn't sleep," he said. "I slept fine," I replied. "I don't lose sleep over thieves." "Do?" He cracked a small smile. "That's healthy. Let's get to work." He motioned for me to sit and pulled up documents on his monitor. "First," he said, "I requested the original POA you granted your sister. It looks legitimate, but she used it far outside its intended scope." "She used it because she knew I trusted her," I said. "And she knew she could slide just far enough under the radar." "And because she understood the system," Crow added. "Most people wouldn't know how to navigate a closing, but she clearly does." I sat forward. "She handled paperwork when our mother passed. She learned a lot from that." "That tracks." He pulled up another document. "Here's the sale contract. The signature is close to perfect. Whoever forged it knows your handwriting well, not just visually structurally. The pressure points match your natural stroke." Meaning it wasn't some quick Photoshop job. It was someone's careful imitation. Someone who'd watched me sign papers since I was 18. Crow opened another file. "Now, this is interesting. Here's the first transfer from your HELOC." He pointed to the line with his pen. 5,000, then 12, then 30, all within 90 days. "And none of those were mine," I said. "I assumed so. What's more telling is the recipient. A personal account under your sister's name, followed by multiple outgoing transfers to someone named Brandon Wells." He clicked another tab. "Most of those outgoing amounts correspond with known gambling transactions, casino deposits, online betting apps, a few private transfers flagged for suspicious patterns." He leaned back. This wasn't a moment of desperation. This was a long-term siphoning operation. The word operation settled heavily, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed exactly what my instincts told me the moment I saw strangers in my penthouse. "Now," Crow said, "we need to understand why she did it. Motivation is everything. Judges look for it, juries rely on it, and it shapes how we present the case." "She resents me," I said plainly. Crow raised an eyebrow. "Do you have reason to believe that?" "She told me I always leave. That everything comes easy to me. That I treat the penthouse like a hotel. That I don't understand pressure." I paused. "She's been carrying that resentment for years." Crow nodded slowly. "That explains the emotional part. But what about the practical part? Why now?" "Brandon's debts," I said. "Both gambling and medical." He typed something into his notes. "Did she indicate she feared for his safety?" "She said people were threatening him." He looked up. "Did you believe her?" "About 30%. He gave a short laugh. "Realistic." "She didn't sell the home because they were in danger," I said. "She sold it because she saw it as an easy solution. She always sees me as someone who has more, so losing something from me doesn't feel like a real consequence to her." Crow nodded and tapped his pen on the desk. "Good. Judges care about psychological patterns. We'll frame her behavior as a mix of entitlement and exploitation rather than necessity." He rotated the monitor toward me. "Now look at this." It was an email. From Vanessa. To a realtor. With a single line that made my stomach flip, not with pain but with confirmation. "If we sell her place, everything goes away. No hesitation, no guilt, your strategy." Crow noticed my expression. "This solidifies intent. She didn't accidentally step over a line. She planned this." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. I always knew she was unhappy. I didn't know she was capable of this. "That's the thing about resentment," Crow said. "People can hide it until they think they've found leverage." Now, the door to his office opened, and his paralegal handed him a thin folder. "More records from the bank," she said. Crow thanked her, flipped through the pages, and slid one toward me. "This," he said, "is the application for the HELOC." There, right under my name, was a signature that looked like mine. Perfectly shaped, perfectly mimicked, perfectly fake. And then Crow pointed to the most important detail. The application had been submitted in person. By Vanessa. He tapped the timestamp at the bottom. "She walked into the bank the day after you left for training," he said. "The timing wasn't an accident. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't impulsive. It was planned, calculated, executed like someone staging a personal heist in broad daylight." I looked at the paper, then closed the folder slowly. Everything about this betrayal had layers: financial, emotional, personal, and each one gave me a clearer view of the person my sister had become. And there was no part of me left that could pretend any of it was salvageable. The drive back to Colorado Springs had a different weight to it this time. The first time I drove down, I was stunned, blindsided, trying to make sense of a situation that didn't feel real yet. This time, everything was painfully clear. The documents, the transfers, the forged signatures, the deliberate timing, none of it left room for misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't desperation. It was a choice. A series of choices actually stacked neatly on top of each other like a poorly built tower that finally collapsed under its own stupidity. And now, I needed answers, not the panicked, half-baked excuses Vanessa threw at me before. Real answers, the kind people give when they run out of lies and the truth has nowhere left to hide. When I pulled into their driveway again, I saw Brandon's truck crookedly parked like it had given up halfway through the act of being functional. Fitting. The house looked the same as yesterday. Blinds half open, porch lights still burned out, a broom leaning against the wall like someone started cleaning and immediately abandoned the mission. I knocked once and stepped back, not because I expected danger, but because I didn't want to be close enough to inhale the desperation leaking through that door. Moments later, it opened. Vanessa's expression flickered between surprise and exhaustion, settling somewhere unpleasantly familiar, like a child caught misbehaving, but still convinced they can argue their way out of trouble. "Again?" she said, voice thin. "Again," I replied, stepping inside before she had the chance to decide whether she wanted me there. Brandon was on the couch this time, surrounded by bills and envelopes he probably hadn't opened. He didn't get up. He didn't even pretend to. She always sees me as someone who has more, so losing something from me doesn't feel like a real consequence to her. Crow nodded and tapped his pen on the desk. "Good. Judges care about psychological patterns. We'll frame her behavior as a mix of entitlement and exploitation rather than necessity." He rotated the monitor toward me. "Now look at this." It was an email. From Vanessa. To a realtor. With a single line that made my stomach flip, not with pain but with confirmation. "You used it to walk into the bank the day after I left for training." Vanessa's composure cracked instantly. "I had to. We were drowning." "You were stealing," I corrected. "There's a difference." She shook her head hard, as if she could dislodge the accusation. "You don't understand what it was like. Every day someone was calling, threatening, demanding payments. I was terrified." "You weren't terrified," I said. "You were tired. You were overwhelmed. There's a difference." 9. She turned away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "We didn't have choices." "You had one," I said. "Ask me for help." She let out a short breath, half sob, half laugh. "You would have lectured me. I would have helped anyway. But I didn't want you to pity me," she snapped. "That wasn't your decision to make." Her shoulders slumped like something inside her finally gave out. She whispered, "You always think you're the hero in every situation." No. That sentence didn't come from recent events. It came from somewhere older, much older. I kept my voice calm. "This isn't about being a hero, it's about you making choices that you knew were wrong. You always had everything," she exploded suddenly, voice shaking as the dam finally cracked. "You were the smart one, the strong one, the loved one. You had direction since high school. You had the army. You always had a purpose. I didn't." "Night." Her breath hitched as she continued, voice rising and cracking in places. "I tried to join the army too, remember? They rejected me. They said I wasn't fit. I was 17 and already failing everything I tried to do. Mom cried because she didn't know what to do with me. Meanwhile, you were already packing your bags to leave for basic training like you were born ready for it." "No?" Memories flashed in my mind, her face when the recruiter told her she didn't qualify, the way she ran upstairs and slammed her bedroom door. I'd assumed she would move on eventually. I never realized she'd carried that moment with her like a stone in her pocket for the next 3 decades. Vanessa kept going, the words tumbling out faster than she could control. "Everyone praised you. Everyone compared me to you. Even when you weren't home, you were everywhere. Charlotte's so disciplined. Charlotte's so dedicated. Why can't you be more like your sister? Do you know how exhausting that is?" "I didn't compare us," I said quietly. "You didn't have to," she shot back. "Life did it for you." I let that sit. Not because I agreed, but because arguments built on emotion never dissolve when you counter them with logic. You have to let them drain before anyone can see clearly. She wiped her eyes again. "When Mom died, I was the one dealing with everything. The paperwork, the calls, the lawyers. I handled it all. And for the first time in my life, I felt useful. I felt like I could finally do something right. So when you gave me that POA, I thought, maybe you trusted me. Maybe I was capable. You were capable, I said, until you weren't. Her face crumpled. She sat down on the edge of the couch like her knees couldn't hold her up anymore. Brandon finally chimed in, unable to stand being background noise any longer. None of this would have happened if you didn't leave her alone all the time. She needed help. You bailed. I turned to him. I was serving my country. Here we go again, he muttered, the patriotic speech. That earned him the coldest stare I could muster. Don't confuse my service with your irresponsibility. He shut up, but the resentment on his face stayed. Vanessa tucked her hair behind her ear with shaking hands. When the debts piled up, I panicked. I kept thinking, Charlotte has more than she needs. She won't miss it. She's barely ever home. She won't even notice. But you did, I said. You noticed enough to forge my signature. She didn't argue, and enough to drain my accounts. She stayed silent, and enough to plan the sale when you knew I'd be gone for months. Her eyes lifted to mine raw, unfiltered, unguarded. I didn't think you'd come back so soon, she whispered. The truth in that sentence landed like a stone. You weren't planning to fix anything, I said. You were hoping time would bury it. She didn't deny it. Brandon stood abruptly, pacing with the energy of a man who couldn't sit still in the presence of consequences. What's done is done, he snapped. You can't keep beating us down over it. We didn't kill anyone. No, I said. You just committed fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. Which, legally speaking, is impressive. You hit a full set. His jaw twitched. You wouldn't send us to jail. I won't have to, I said. You already did that to yourselves. Vanessa covered her face with both hands. Please stop, please. I can't. I didn't push further. There was no point. She'd hit the wall where self-deception and reality collide, and the impact was doing all the heavy lifting. The room fell into a tense, uneven silence. Brandon paced like a caged dog. Vanessa sat hunched over, guilt spilling through the cracks. And I stood there, the only one who wasn't collapsing, because clarity is stable even when everything else around it isn't. I finally spoke, not to threaten, not to accuse, but because facts have their own gravity once spoken aloud. I'm filing, civil and criminal. Vanessa looked up, eyes wide, like she'd been struck. Brandon swore under his breath. And the last piece of denial in the room evaporated so cleanly, it might as well have never been there. Filing the paperwork didn't feel dramatic or triumphant. It felt procedural, like ordering supplies, tracking inventory, or submitting an incident report. The kind of task you do because it needs doing, not because you enjoy it. Crow moved fast, and by Monday morning we were in a small hearing room at the county courthouse for an emergency injunction. Nothing glamorous. Fluorescent lights, scuffed floors, clocks that ticked too loudly. She was a middle-aged woman with a calm face and the exact kind of no-nonsense presence that makes grown adults sit straighter than they've sat in their entire lives. She began with the basics: names, purpose of the hearing, case type, before finally turning her eyes toward me. Ms. Hayes, your attorney has filed a motion regarding unauthorized sale of your property. I've reviewed the submitted exhibits. Do you wish to add anything? No, Your Honor, I said. Mr. Crow will speak for me. She looked like she hadn't slept. He looked like he'd slept too well for someone facing the consequences of their own decisions. They sat across the aisle with a lawyer who seemed slightly irritated to be there, a public defender assigned last minute because they hadn't been able to afford real representation. Brandon whispered something to her that made her glare at him. A promising start. The judge entered, and everyone rose. She was a middle-aged woman with a calm face and the exact kind of no-nonsense presence that makes grown adults sit straighter than they've sat in their entire lives. She began with the basics: names, purpose of the hearing, case type, before finally turning her eyes toward me. Ms. Hayes, your attorney has filed a motion regarding unauthorized sale of your property. I've reviewed the submitted exhibits. Do you wish to add anything? No, Your Honor, I said. Mr. Crow will speak for me. None. She nodded and turned to him. Crow stepped forward with the quiet confidence of someone who enjoys dismantling sloppy crimes. Your Honor, the sale of Miss Hayes's penthouse was not only conducted without her knowledge, but facilitated through a forged signature and misuse of a limited power of attorney. We have bank records showing unauthorized HELOC draws, digital handwriting analysis indicating fraud, and timestamps proving the defendant acted days after Miss Hayes left for military training. He placed a binder on the desk. We also have evidence that the property was intentionally undervalued to secure a fast sale, consistent with attempts to evade financial scrutiny. The judge flipped through a few pages and didn't bother hiding her unimpressed expression. "Where are the defendants?" Their attorney pushed her chair back and stood. "Your Honor, my clients maintain they believed the sale was authorized. The sister, Miss Vanessa Hayes, had long-standing access to documents, and Miss Hayes was frequently away for extended periods. They had reason to believe she intended to sell the unit." Crow didn't even try to hide his smirk. "Your Honor, Miss Hayes is not a traveling magician disappearing for unknown reasons. She is a service member. She left for training, not a gap year." The judge tapped her pen against the desk. "Miss Hayes," she looked at Vanessa. "Is this correct? Did you believe you had authority to sign the sale documents?" Vanessa's throat bobbed. "I thought it was okay. She gave me permission to handle things." "To handle things," the judge repeated. "Such as what?" "Paperwork, bills, her mail, stuff like that." "Did she ever give you permission to sell her home?" "No," she whispered. There it was. Not a dramatic confession. Not a meltdown. Just one soft word falling out of her mouth like it had slipped past her intention. The judge heard it, Crow heard it, I heard it. And whatever fragile defense they had left crumbled under the weight of it. The judge turned toward Brandon. "And you? Did you believe you had legal authority to participate in these transactions?" He puffed out his chest like a rooster prepared to embarrass itself. "I trusted my wife. She said it was allowed." "No, that wasn't my question," the judge said, voice sharp enough to slice through the air. "Did you, personally, believe you had the right to withdraw funds from accounts under Miss Charlotte Hayes' name?" His bravado collapsed. "I mean, I didn't think about it." The judge sighed. "I believe that." Crow stepped forward again. "Your Honor, we respectfully request immediate reversal of the sale and restoration of ownership to Miss Hayes. Additionally, a freeze on all accounts linked to the HELOC until a full audit is completed." The judge scanned the documents once more. "The evidence overwhelmingly supports fraudulent activity. The sale is hereby voided pending further litigation. Ownership reverts to Miss Hayes effective immediately. Title company and escrow will be notified." She paused. "And all HELOC-related transfers are frozen." Vanessa's hand covered her mouth. Brandon muttered something that sounded like a mix of curse words and creative whining. The judge continued, "Given the nature of these allegations, I am also forwarding this to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. This hearing is adjourned." Her gavel hit the block with a soft thud that felt heavier than a grenade blast. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. But Vanessa didn't move. She stayed seated while people filed out, staring at the floor like she'd forgotten what standing was. Brandon paced behind her, cursing under his breath, occasionally shooting me a look that suggested he believed this entire situation was happening to him, not because of him. Crow packed up his briefcase and nodded toward the exit. "Let's go, we've done what we needed to do here." I followed him out of the courtroom. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, the kind of background noise you only notice when everything else goes quiet. As we walked, Crow glanced at me. "You handled yourself well in there." "I didn't have to do anything," I said. "They practically confessed." He shrugged. "People like them usually do. They don't think far enough ahead to build a consistent lie." We stepped outside into the sunlight. "You wouldn't send us to jail." "I won't have to," I said. "You already did that to yourselves." Vanessa covered her face with both hands. "Please stop, please. I can't." I didn't push further. There was no point. She'd hit the wall where self-deception and reality collide, and the impact was doing all the heavy lifting. The room fell into a tense, uneven silence. Brandon paced like a caged dog. Vanessa sat hunched over, guilt spilling through the cracks. Brandon muttered something that sounded like a mix of curse words and creative whining. The judge continued, "Given the nature of these allegations, I am also forwarding this to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. This hearing is adjourned." Her gavel hit the block with a soft thud that felt heavier than a grenade blast. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. But Vanessa didn't move. Behind those walls, a judge had dismantled Vanessa's decisions with a few signatures. But outside, the consequences were still unfolding. The legal part was straightforward. The emotional part was a tangle with no clean edges. I walked toward my car, feeling the familiar steadiness settle back into place. Not satisfaction, not anger. Just the sense that each step forward was necessary, whether I liked it or not. Walking back into the penthouse after the injunction felt strange, like stepping into a place that was mine but carried someone else's fingerprints. The walls, the floors, the view, everything was exactly where I left it, yet the air felt different, not haunted, just disturbed, like the space itself had been forced to entertain guests it didn't like. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the familiar details settle into place. The quiet helped. It had a grounding effect, the same kind I used to feel when stepping into an empty supply tent after a long day on deployment. The first task was simple: document everything. Crow wanted photos, timestamps, inventory checks, anything that might help later. I walked through each room, snapping pictures, noting scratches on furniture, dents on the coffee table, and the gouge on the baseboard that definitely wasn't there before. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to irritate anyone who took care of their things. My phone buzzed again. A new email from Crow marked urgent. DA's office fast-tracking review. Need you here this afternoon. I didn't need more explanation. When the district attorney moves fast, it's rarely out of curiosity. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The DA's office was a square, unremarkable building with the charm of a post office and the personality of stale coffee. Inside, the air conditioner was doing its best to impersonate an Arctic blast. A receptionist directed me to a small conference room where Crow was already seated with a thick stack of documents. Across from him sat a prosecutor late 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that makes people sit straighter without realizing why. She extended her hand. Miss Hayes, I'm Assistant District Attorney Monroe. I'm the one reviewing your case. Her handshake was firm, no hesitation. Good sign. She opened the folder in front of her. We've reviewed the bank records, the POA misuse, the forged documents, and the transfer trail. This isn't borderline or ambiguous. It's criminal. Crow nodded. Exactly what I've been telling her. Monroe continued. The forged HELOC application alone is a felony. Add in identity theft, financial exploitation, and the undervalued sale facilitated through misrepresentation. It's a web. Nups. I waited for the part where she tried to soften it, maybe mention mitigating circumstances. She didn't. Given the severity, we'll be moving this to a grand jury. Crow leaned back. Faster than expected. People who forge federal documents don't get leisurely timelines, Monroe said. And frankly, I don't like cases where the victim is a service member. You've given enough to this country without losing your house because your sister made poor life choices. I appreciated her candor. Not many prosecutors talk like real people. Monroe flipped to another page. One more thing. We pulled phone records. Your sister coordinated the sale over text with the realtor. Several messages explicitly state she was acting under your authorization. Can I see? I asked. She slid the papers toward me. There it was Vanessa promising to handle everything, insisting I was fully aware, using phrasing I'd never use in my life. I didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. She really thought she could bluff through this, Monroe said. But when one lie requires 10 more to stay alive, it collapses fast. The meeting wrapped with Monroe outlining next steps: subpoenas, interviews, inventory audits, and forensic analysis on signatures. Nothing surprising, just a timeline being built brick by brick. Crow and I walked out together. He exhaled through his nose. Well, that's the calmest criminal attorney I've ever seen. You're in good hands. Now. My phone buzzed again as we reached the parking lot. This time it wasn't a bank or a lawyer. It was Vanessa. A text. We need to talk. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But ignoring her never made anything better. She was the type to spiral into 10 bad decisions for every one unanswered message. So I replied, made in public. A few minutes later, she agreed. A coffee shop near her house. When I arrived, she was already there, seated at a corner table with her hair pulled into a messy bun and a half-finished iced latte sweating in front of her. She looked smaller than usual, shoulders hunched like her body was subconsciously bracing for impact. She didn't speak when I sat down. She kept staring at her cup as if the right words were hidden at the bottom. Finally, she whispered, "They called me." I didn't ask who she meant. There was only one they in her life now. Not many prosecutors talk like real people. Monroe flipped to another page. One more thing. We pulled phone records. Your sister coordinated the sale over text with the realtor. Several messages explicitly state she was acting under your authorization. Can I see? I asked. She slid the papers toward me. There it was, Vanessa promising to handle everything, insisting I was fully aware, using phrasing I'd never use in my life. I didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. I was trying to help. No, I said. You were trying to escape the consequences of Brandon's decisions. And yours. She shook her head violently. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You meant for enough of it to happen. She pushed her latte away like the cup suddenly disgusted her. I shouldn't have trusted him. The shift wasn't subtle. It rolled out of her like she'd been waiting for permission to blame someone else. I didn't let it slide. You didn't trust him, I said. You chose him over ethics, over common sense, over family, over the law. Blaming him won't erase what you signed. She stared at her hands, voice barely audible. Do you think I'm a bad person? No, I said. I think you're a person who made a series of bad choices because you wanted a shortcut out of consequences. She flinched, not because it was harsh, but because it was accurate. Her eyes glistened. They're going to arrest me. Probably, I said, not unkind, just honest. Her voice broke entirely. I can't go to jail, Charlotte. I can't. I watched her carefully. Panic wasn't new to her, but this was something different, not performative, not manipulative, just raw fear scraping the edges of her voice. She looked up, tears slipping down her cheeks. Can't you fix this? Don't you have connections? You were in the army. You know people. Can't you make one call? No, I said. That's not how this works, and even if it were, I wouldn't do it. No. She whispered. Why not? Because accountability matters, I said. You spent years avoiding it. That's why we're here. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Not dramatically, not manipulatively, just overwhelmed in a way that stripped away all her defenses. The barista called out a drink order. Someone laughed near the window. A baby squealed. The world kept turning while my sister fell apart across from me. When she finally lowered her hands, her mascara was smeared and her voice was quiet. I'm scared. I know, I said. A long silence stretched between us, not tense, not hostile, just heavy in a way that didn't require filling. She wiped her face with a napkin. What do I do now? Tell the truth, I said. She didn't respond, but the answer had landed. Her shoulders straightened by a fraction. Not acceptance, not courage, but the early tremor of someone who realizes there's no shortcut left. When we stood to leave, she hesitated as if she wanted to speak again. But no words came. She stepped outside into the sunlight, blinking like the world was too bright for her now. I watched her walk to her car, moving slowly, like each step required more energy than her body had left. There was no dramatic pivot, no sudden realization, no emotional breakthrough that fixed anything. Just a quiet shift. The moment when denial gave way to reality, not because she accepted it, but because she no longer had any strength left to fight it. The weeks leading up to the trial moved in a strange rhythm, fast in paperwork, slow in emotions, steady in the way only bureaucracy can be. I spent most of that time providing documents, answering questions, and watching the case grow into something bigger than any private argument between siblings. The DA assembled a file thick enough to stop a bullet. Crow reviewed every page like he was prepping for a chess match against someone who didn't know the rules. By the time the court date arrived, the courthouse parking lot was already filling up with lawyers, clerks, and unlucky citizens dragged into jury duty. I walked through the metal detectors, placed my keys and phone in the tray, and followed Crow into a hallway lined with benches that looked like they'd been bought at a discount prison supply auction. Vanessa and Brandon were at the far end. She looked pale, almost ghost-like, hands clasped tightly in front of her as if she were trying to keep her body from shaking. Brandon sat beside her, chewing gum at a pace that suggested he might actually grind his teeth into dust. Their lawyer flipped through folders with the quiet desperation of someone who knows the case is unwinnable but can't afford to quit. The courtroom itself was small. No mahogany paneling or dramatic acoustics, just beige walls, worn carpet, and the faint smell of old paperwork. A fluorescent light flickered above the second row, giving the room an unintentional interrogation vibe. When the bailiff called the case, Vanessa stood slowly, like her legs had forgotten how to operate under pressure. Brandon stood too, but stayed half a step behind her, the way people do when they know they're partly responsible for dragging someone into a mess but don't want to be the one in front when the consequences hit. The prosecution opened with facts clean, chronological, inarguable. There was no dramatic pivot, no sudden realization, no emotional breakthrough that fixed anything. Just a quiet shift. The moment when denial gave way to reality. Not because she accepted it, but because she no longer had any strength left to fight it. The weeks leading up to the trial moved in a strange rhythm, fast in paperwork, slow in emotions, steady in the way only bureaucracy can be. Then she put a handwriting expert on the stand. He explained the differences between authentic and forged signatures with the kind of enthusiasm only handwriting experts seem to possess. His final statement was simple. These signatures were deliberately practiced and replicated, not imitated, replicated. This was not accidental, it was intentional. Crow leaned toward me and whispered, "Jurors love experts, especially ones with fancy terminology." He wasn't wrong. Vanessa's lawyer tried to counter with a narrative about financial stress, miscommunication, and family misunderstandings. She implied that the sale wasn't malicious, just sloppy, poorly planned, a mistake under pressure, a misguided attempt to help. Monroe dismantled that argument in less than a minute. "Accidents don't require forged signatures," she said flatly. "Desperation does not justify identity theft. And no amount of stress allows a person to legally sell someone else's home without consent." The first real shift happened when the judge called Vanessa to the stand. She moved with the careful steps of someone walking through water, each step heavier than the last. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and stared at her hands. The judge asked her to confirm her identity. She did. Monroe approached slowly. "Miss Hayes, did you sign your sister's name on these documents?" Vanessa's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Yes." A murmur filtered through the courtroom. She lifted her head but didn't look at me. "I didn't want." Her sentence faded, swallowed by the weight of the admission. Monroe didn't push her. That was the strategy: give someone enough room, and the truth unravels on its own. "Why?" Monroe asked gently. Vanessa stared at the table for a long moment before answering. "Because everything was falling apart. The bills, the debt, the threats. I felt cornered, and I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought she wouldn't care, that she'd be fine. She always is." Monroe nodded, letting the confession settle in. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Did your sister ever give you permission to sell her home?" Vanessa closed her eyes. "No." "And did she ever know that you were withdrawing money from her accounts?" "No." Monroe stepped back, satisfied. No further questions. Brandon was called next. He swaggered up like the courtroom was a minor inconvenience, but the moment the prosecution asked about the gambling transactions, that swagger crumbled. Every "I don't remember" only made the jurors lean in harder. Every contradiction made Monroe's notebook grow heavier. By the time he stepped down, his face was flushed with that specific kind of embarrassment reserved for people who realize they aren't half as clever as they believed. The judge called a brief recess, and the room emptied. Vanessa sat on the bench outside with her head in her hands. Brandon paced the hallway like a malfunctioning wind-up toy. Neither spoke to me. I didn't speak to them. There was nothing left to say. When court resumed, the judge took her seat, stacked the papers neatly, and spoke with the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering consequences. "You manipulated legal authority entrusted to you, exploited your sister's absence, and engaged in financial conduct that cannot be explained as mere desperation." Vanessa's shoulders shook, though she tried to hold still. "For these reasons, the court sentences you to 10 months in county detention, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You will be required to complete financial restitution and mandatory counseling." Brandon swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the bench. "You manipulated legal authority entrusted to you, exploited your sister's absence, and engaged in financial conduct that cannot be explained as mere desperation." Vanessa's shoulders shook, though she tried to hold still. "For these reasons, the court sentences you to 10 months in county detention, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You will be required to complete financial restitution and mandatory counseling." Brandon swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the bench. "As for Mr. Wells," the judge went on, "your involvement is under separate review by the district attorney's office. Based on the records presented, further charges may follow." The gavel clicked softly, not loudly, not theatrically, just enough to punctuate the end of something that had been unraveling for months. When the judge left, people began to file out. Lawyers packed their bags, papers rustled, chairs scraped. The machinery of the courthouse kept moving. Vanessa didn't move right away. She sat still, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not frantic tears, not manipulative tears, just quiet, defeated ones. The kind that come when there's no excuse left to hide behind. As the bailiff approached her, she finally looked up just once and her eyes found mine. There was no resentment, no anger, no denial, only a fragile, painful clarity. Her voice came out barely louder than a breath. I'm sorry. Not for the court, not for the judge. For me. Then she stood, hands trembling, and let the bailiff guide her forward. She didn't look back again, and I didn't expect her to. The courtroom door closed behind her with a soft click, the kind that doesn't echo, just settles into the air like another fact of life. Leaving the courthouse that day didn't feel victorious. It didn't feel satisfying. It didn't even feel like closure. It felt quiet, too quiet for the weight of everything that had just happened. The sky above Denver was clear, bright, almost overly cheerful for a day when a decade of resentment had detonated in a courtroom. People walked in and out of the building, talking on phones, sipping coffee, living their lives without any idea that someone's future had just been carved into new shape. I walked toward my car with steady steps, letting the cool air settle around me. Nothing rushed. Nothing demanded my attention. The city hummed with its usual routine, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was sprinting to catch up with anything. I sat behind the wheel, closed the door, and rested my hands on the steering wheel for a few quiet seconds. There's a strange stillness after a storm, not relief, not sadness, just the awareness that things won't go back to how they were, no matter how much you try to stitch them back together. When I got back to the penthouse, the elevator ride up felt different than before, as if the building itself recognized me again. I stepped inside, flicked on the lights, and exhaled when the familiar glow filled the space. Everything looked normal, my furniture, the view, the quiet. But underneath the familiarity was a thread of something new. A faint distance. The kind that appears when a place has been touched by too many hands, too carelessly. I walked across the living room, running my fingers along the back of the couch. A tiny scratch I hadn't noticed before caught my eye. Nothing major, nothing anyone else would see. But I saw it the way soldiers see the first signs of wear on gear they've carried for too long. A reminder of what had been taken without permission. I spent the next hour putting things back in order, not because they needed it, but because I did. Straightening pillows, rearranging books, wiping down surfaces. The kind of resetting that isn't about cleaning, but about reclaiming space. When I finished, I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Cars crawled along the roads like small points of life. People filled sidewalks in steady streams. The world kept moving. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the county jail automated system. You have received a letter from an inmate. I opened the digital scan. It was from Vanessa. Her handwriting was uneven, the way it always was when she tried to write something emotional. The first line was shaky. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm writing because the silence is heavier than I imagined. She went on to talk about the arrest, the booking, the coldness of county holding cells, but the part that hit hardest wasn't anything about her sentence. It was the paragraph where she admitted something she'd never said out loud before. I always wanted to be like you. When the army rejected me, I felt like they rejected who I wanted to become. You didn't know that, because I didn't want you to think I was weak. And when you succeeded, I felt left behind. Not because you did anything wrong, because I didn't know how to build anything of my own. The letter felt raw, unfinished, honest in a way she rarely managed in person. She didn't ask me to fix anything. She didn't beg for help. She didn't excuse what she did. She just told the truth. Near the end, she wrote, I'm sorry, for the house, the money, the lies, all of it, but mostly for turning you into the enemy in my head when you weren't one. I sat down on the arm of the couch and let the weight of it settle, not crushing, not overwhelming, just present. After a while, I stood, grabbed a pen and paper, and wrote back. I kept it short, direct, honest. The same way I would speak on deployment when someone needed clarity more than comfort. I won't pretend this didn't hurt, but I'm glad you told the truth. I hope you use this time to rebuild. I paused, then added one more line. When you're ready to do things the right way, I'll listen. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not an open door, just a crack in the wall, small, intentional, possible. I sealed the letter and set it aside for mailing the next morning. The rest of the evening passed quietly. I made dinner, cleaned up, took a shower, and finally sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. I walked across the living room, running my fingers along the back of the couch. A tiny scratch I hadn't noticed before caught my eye. Nothing major, nothing anyone else would see. But I saw it the way soldiers see the first signs of wear on gear they've carried for too long. A reminder of what had been taken without permission. I spent the next hour putting things back in order, not because they needed it, but because I did. Straightening pillows, rearranging books, wiping down surfaces. The city stretched out below me in a glowing grid, lights shimmering across buildings, bridges, and roads. Denver always looked better at night. Calmer, steadier, like the darkness softened the edges of everything. Standing there, I realized something simple. I'd survived worse. War zones, loss, loneliness, sleepless nights in places that never made the news. Family fallout wasn't new, just different. Messier in the way emotional things always are, but not impossible. The kind of resetting that isn't about cleaning, but about reclaiming space. When I finished, I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Cars crawled along the roads like small points of life. People filled sidewalks in steady streams. The world kept moving. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the county jail automated system. You have received a letter from an inmate. I opened the digital scan. It was from Vanessa. I thought about the programs I'd heard about, the ones for veterans dealing with financial exploitation, identity theft, scams, and family abuse. It wasn't something people talk about much. But you'd be surprised how many service members get targeted by the people they trust most. I considered volunteering. Maybe speaking. Maybe helping others navigate the kind of betrayal that never fits neatly into a police report. I set the cup down and let the night air wash over me, steady and cool, as the city hummed below and the last sharp edges of the past months finally softened enough to breathe through. And standing there, looking out at a view I fought to reclaim, I felt something simple and solid settle inside me, a truth without drama, without anger, without bitterness. I survived war. I survived betrayal. And I wasn't done living.